Hello, I'm Veronica Andrews, your host. Welcome once again to Off the Shelf Books on Tour. Have I got a book for you today? And I don't really know how to introduce it, but I thought of a recipe card. Real fancy. You take modern everyday people for the 1577 year in Rome. You put a little bit of mystery, a little bit of skullduggery, a murder here and there, code, illegitimate love affairs. I don't think this young lady, Crystal King, left anything out.
Well, I had a lot of fun figuring out how to weave all the history together, that's for sure.
Oh, you did a good job. And this was a real chef to the Vatican.
Yes, Bartolomeo Scappi was a celebrated chef, even in his own time. And he lived roughly 1500 to 1570 or so. And he was a chef to several different cardinals and at least 3, maybe 4 popes. We're not exactly sure, but we have a pretty good idea that he worked for at least several wealthy families and several popes.
And he was renowned in his ability to cook. Some of the recipes you put out, what a review I read, you'll be hungry when you finish. I was hungry on page 5.
Oh, excellent. Then my job is done. That was part of my goal.
Well, you did a very good job. I envision cold, snowy winter's night, curl up in a chair, because once you start reading, you're not going to want to put it down.
Perfect.
Yeah, well, I would definitely say, and yet, what did I read last night? Was the first book the hardest to write or the second?
I think the first book was the hardest. My first novel was Feast of Sorrow, which is about an ancient Roman gourmand named Apicius. And that was the hardest because I'd never written a book before.
Did you want to write? What did you study?
I was an English major in college, and I had always thought I wanted to write, but the idea of a novel just seemed long. So I wrote poetry for a long time. And then I got my master's in critical and creative thinking at UMass Boston, and I developed a series of exercises for writers in progress who were stuck in the middle of their books. And agents that were interested in me said, nobody knows who you are, so you have to teach, you have to write a book, or you have to write a book, or somebody else has to write a book with these exercises. So I started teaching. I taught at a lot of the universities around the Boston area, and then I decided I better write a book. And so I started writing a book about a celebrity chef who had a magical set of knives that had traveled through time. And the chef, in the working of this, I needed an origin story for these knives. And who was the first person to have these knives, the chef. And so I found a scene with Apicius, who was I found a passage in a history book that mentioned how he died, and it was in first century Rome, and I thought, that's so interesting, I'll write a scene with him. And it became so fascinating, I thought, I'm going to write that whole book instead. I'm going to write about this man's crazy life because he died in a really interesting way. And that sort of set me on my path. And as I was doing more research, I realized there's all these Italian culinary heroes that nobody knows about. So I have a lot of really great ideas for chefs in Italy that I can write about.
How long did it take you to write the first book?
I wrote it probably mostly on Sundays. And over the course of maybe 4 years or so, it took me 3 years to find an agent. Because it was a long book, and publishers don't like long books from authors in the first place, because if they print it and it doesn't sell well, they've wasted a lot of money in paper. So finally I found the agent. She sold it in less than 6 months, but then it was another 18 months after we sold it. The publishing industry, turns out, is a long period of time. So from the moment I first started writing it till the moment it came out was almost 10 years.
And what was it like when the box arrived at the house and you opened it up and you saw it in print?
I was by myself, and I picked it up off the front porch, and I just sat on the stairs and just started crying. So it was pretty amazing to open that up and see that.
And then you walk by a store or in a mall and you see it on display.
The first time on the way to the book launch, we stopped at Harvard Square Bookstore, and I went in, and it was on the front the front counter. Like this, the moment you walk in, my book is right there, and I just lost it. It was the best feeling ever. And one of my dearest friends had come to Boston that had been somebody I knew back when I was 16, and he had always been a writing inspiration and somebody that had championed me all along throughout the years. So he was with me when that happened too, so that was pretty cool.
Nice. Nice. And what did your family think of it? Was your mother say, where did that come from?
They were very proud of me. My family, they're very, very pleased about it. I don't know if they ever thought I'd write a book. I think they knew that I was always somebody who was interested in writing, but didn't know if I would ever take it to fruition, because I've been working in another capacity.
Area.
I've been in marketing for a long time, and I think that's what they thought I was doing. They're very proud of me.
But no matter what you do to get here, you learn.
Yes.
You tuck it away, and you're in the details, the addition of a recipe, of pulling out something that one particular pope or cardinal didn't like. That's very noticeable throughout the whole thing. It's almost as if you're a fly on the wall watching all of this unfold.
Yeah, one thing that helps a lot is that I like to go to the places where my characters might have walked. So I've gone to Italy several times and had the opportunity to actually walk on the streets that existed in that time frame. That's the one thing that's really amazing about Rome, is that things still stand. I can walk in the Palazzo. I can go to the Vatican, and the Vatican looks very different than it did at this time frame. They were still building the Dome of St. Peter's when I was writing the book, but being able to do that helps me picture it a lot better.
Now, if they're walking around in your head, will you ever be able to take them out and put them on a bookshelf so you can fill it full of other people?
Yes, yes. Each person, well, I'm working on my third novel now, and so it's almost like these characters feel so far gone in some ways, because
back in the 15th.
Yeah, well, I'm writing about the Renaissance as well still, but it just seems far away, the characters themselves, because the characters I'm working with now are just very different people, with different personalities and different things that they're thinking and worrying about. So it's good, but there's still, I think all of my characters have a little piece of each other in them, definitely.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Piece of me, probably.
But the names are not recognizable. But I can imagine if an author is in an airport or something and he hears, Jim Ryan, come to the desk, and you go, I made him up. He can't be real. I mean.
Well, a lot of the people in my novels are real, actually. In fact, I was looking through The Chef's Secret and trying to figure out how many of the people are actually real, or how many people I truly made up. Because there's a lot of people whose names, they were people that existed, we just don't know anything about them. So, for example, Giovanni, who is Bartolomeo Scappi's nephew and apprentice, we literally know nothing about him other than the fact that this particular book, which is the Scappi cookbook, has over 1,000 recipes in it. It's dedicated to his nephew, Giovanni. And so we know that much about him, and we know a little bit more about Giovanni from his will, but we know nothing about his life, so I make all that up. But as I was going through all of the book, I realized probably 90% of the people in the book are real people, but we only know some things about some of them. So,
yeah, but you got the good stuff.
Yeah. Well, I get to play with, this time frame is really fun because it's people like Michelangelo, and the popes are very familiar to people. There's a famous goldsmith, Benvenuto Cellini, who, if you've ever been to Florence on the Ponte Vecchio, he's got a statue of himself, like on the bridge. He was a pretty famous person in his time. So
did he make the statue, or was it made to honor him?
It's a statue of him made to honor him. He was somebody who, he appears in my book very briefly, actually, because he wrote the very first autobiography as we know it, where he talks very boastingly of his life. And he made lots of gold and medals and salt cellars and things like that for popes and for cardinals and for the wealthy families in Italy. And he was always in jail for things like sodomy and murder. And he would get out of jail because these cardinals and these popes wanted him to do all this gold work for them because he was so good at it. But his autobiography is just full of like amazing, crazy stories of his time in Rome. He thought very highly of himself. So it's fun to take that real person and kind of play with him. And
you never hear from the families, or you make sure they're all gone
well,
before you mention their names?
Fortunately, this is 500 years ago, so even if some of the families still do exist. So, for example, the woman who is one of the main characters in the book is the daughter of a Kiji family, which is still a family that exists in Rome today. And no, nobody's ever said anything to me. None of the families have come to me. But my book's being published in Italy next.
Oh boy!
In a few months, so that may be.
Yeah, you never can tell if they're in ancestry like we are here in the States.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
It could be favorable too. It could be somebody who could fill in the holes that you don't know about that never got written down.
I'm hoping that's going to be the case as I move forward through time and write about people that are more recent, that some of the families might be interested in helping me.
Good enough. What's the next book about? No, wait a minute. This is the second?
This is the second.
So now you're on the third.
Correct.
I asked for the first one when I was in Maine at the library, and I was crushed that they didn't have it.
Oh, I should have brought you a copy.
Oh, send it to me.
I will. I definitely will. It's a very different book. The first book is more of a tragedy, and this one is more of a love story and a mystery.
And a little murder.
There's murder in all my books. Yes, there's some murder in this one. Definitely.
But very unique murder, not the kind you read every day.
No. I had some fun figuring out how to take care of some people.
Did the Pope ever come after you and ask you to explain yourself?
Nope.
So the next book is in development or already on its way?
I am working on the last 3 chapters of the first draft, so hopefully it's soon. It's set in the Renaissance as well, and it's about the meat carver to Alessandro Farnese, who was a cardinal, Alessandro Farnese. There was a Pope, Alessandro Farnese, who was his grandfather, and he was the wealthiest man in all of Italy. And this man was a meat carver, what they call a trinciante. And a trinciante is somebody who doesn't just carve the meat on the plate like we do for Thanksgiving with the turkey. It's actually on a fork. The birds would be, or the meat would be, a big fork or sword maybe, and it could be as many as 2 or 3 birds. And they would carve with the knife, and the meat would fall magically on the plate below, in front of the Lord. So
I can do that.
You can do that?
I just overcook
I'm coming
the
to
bird.
your house.
As long as you like peanut butter.
Oh, okay. Well,
Not a great
I
cook.
do.
I'm amazed at foodies and their fascination with food in the restaurants, even in the toughest time when the economy is down and every restaurant parking lot is full.
People love food. That's part of the reason why I liked writing the books, is because the food is something everybody can relate to. You know, it's part of all of our celebrations. It's part of our religion. It's part of our politics. It's part of every family gathering. It's funerals, weddings, just sitting down with friends. And I really love that. And I loved also recreating a lot of the dishes too. That's been super fun.
They weren't real?
Oh, no, they are real. But like the recipes in this book
Now, who published that?
So this is a translation. It's by Terence Scully, who is an English scholar, and this you can pick it up in on any online bookstore. And it was published maybe about 10 years ago, and it has a lot of additional information about the recipes. The recipes, the cookbook itself is 1,000 recipes. It was published in 1570, and it was the best-selling cookbook for almost 200 years.
That predates Betty Crocker.
It does. 900 of the 1,000 recipes have sugar in it because they thought sugar was a health food, which I think is amazing. I really want it to be a health food.
And I read somewhere yellow sugar.
It was probably brown originally, and you would grate it. It would come in a hard cone of some sort. You would grate it. But they were really big on sugar sculptures. They had elaborate sugar sculptures, and then they would paint the sugar sculptures in all sorts of crazy, beautiful colors. There's a scene in the book where there's like pretty much a whole monstrous table that fills a banquet, and it's got a whole town and all done in sugar. But they used to do that. It's pretty amazing.
That's because they didn't have televisions to watch.
They didn't, and they had a way. There was a way to show off their money.
And they had a work ethic that said you went to work and you did a good job, and you weren't done until you were done.
It's true.
A lost art in many areas.
Not in all, though.
Now, will you go back to Italy for the next book, or have you already been?
My husband and I try to go once a year, and it's something that we love anyway. But I'm going back actually for the New Year's season, so that's super fun. And doing a lot of research while I'm there as well. So for finalizing, I've done a lot of the work for book 3, but there's all sorts of really interesting things that I want to double check and experience more specifically. For example, in the Castel Sant'Angelo in Rome, which is this huge castle. It was originally the mausoleum for Emperor Hadrian in ancient Rome. There was a prison that was there, and in my novel, I have some of my characters are imprisoned in Castel Sant'Angelo. And I can see pictures of and I've been to Castel Sant'Angelo, but I've never been to the prisons. So that's
Is the prison like a dungeon in the basement?
Yes. And so I want to go back and actually talk with a historian and go through the prisons and understand more about how that all worked. And so being able to do that is super helpful to get the details right in my novels.
Does the internet help?
Yes. Yes, Google is actually a pretty...
Your best friend?
Yeah, unfortunately. That's a love-hate relationship, definitely.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, Google, well, when I first started writing, it was hard to get a lot of the information because things hadn't been digitized. Not everything was online in the same way it is now. Now I can actually get pretty much most of my information on the internet, maybe not necessarily like in Wikipedia, but I can download academic articles. I can discover what books that I might need that I could order. I can see photos of the places I've been. I can go on Google Maps and actually walk the streets of the places that I might be writing about.
Do you enjoy this kind of interaction? Do you do book clubs and libraries?
Yes. Book clubs and libraries actually are some of my favorite audiences to talk to because they love books and they love the experience of it. I think book clubs are the most fun though because I get to actually, we can recreate the recipes. One of the things I did for both of my novels is I put together companion cookbooks where you can actually take the original Renaissance recipes and I've modified them a bit so a home cook today could make them. So book clubs can make those recipes. And it's so fun to be able to talk about the book, but also eat the foods that...
So they serve it to you while you're talking about the book?
Or serve it to, the club. And so that is very fun. And I've worked with a lot of restaurants as well, where we do a whole meal that's a Renaissance meal, and then I'll talk in between courses, and that is super fun too.
Wicked. When I'm making something, which isn't very often, and I don't have what I need, I pick out the Betty Crocker cookbook where you can, World War II, substitute this when you don't have that.
Yes.
That's about as far back as I go.
Well, you'd be surprised at how many of those recipes in the Betty Crocker cookbook started in this book.
Oh, I'm sure. Things
like pasta, there's some of the first dishes, pasta. There's a fried chicken recipe in the cookbook. And it's just like you would have fried chicken today, except the spices are cinnamon, nutmeg, clove, and coriander.
Wow.
Which makes for a really strange tasting fried chicken. But there's also the first turkey recipes. He tells you how to roast a turkey. The only difference probably between him and Betty Crocker is that he tells you how to make the turkey still look alive after it's been cooked. So when you served it, it looks like you're getting a whole bird on the plate.
Well, but as you said earlier, their presentation was half the meal.
It's very true.
The
entertainment of it.
The attractiveness, how it stood up. And I mean, some of these things they made weeks in advance. And how they ever kept them, they didn't have refrigeration as we know.
Well, it's interesting. I was in Urbino last fall at the Ducale, the Palazzo Ducale. And one of the things that I was able to see and talk with a historian about is this area in the basement where
Like a root cellar?
Not exactly. There was a huge cellar. There was actually the stables were there, and the stables would hold, I think, 300 horses or something. This is in the basement of this castle. And it would also, this is where the kitchens were. That's where they would butcher the animals for the meals. That's where storage was. But there was also this big round brick hole in the ground, and it was lined in brick. The whole thing was lined in brick. And above it was this huge skylight that just opened to the sky, but several floors up. And this hole was in the lowest part of the castle, and it turns out it's where they would keep snow so it would snow because they're in the mountains.
Yeah.
It would snow very heavily over the course of the winter, and then since it's in such a cold place, they could use that to store cold items. And throughout the summer, it would eventually pack into ice, and they would use it for cold drinks and to keep cold items colder for longer. So they were creative.
Well, they were. I have a daughter who loves castles and always thought she wanted to live in them till she toured Ireland and England and Scotland, and they had no bathrooms.
Oh, no, they definitely did not.
They only had outhouses.
Yeah, chamber pots.
No, they actually had a space, and I can't remember the name of it now, but that was, needless to say, on the basement floor. And when you came in with your big cape and coat and it was wet from the snow or the rain, they hung it here on the second or third floor because the heat generated from the interior bathrooms would go up.
Wow, that's nuts.
That's when she decided she didn't want to live in a castle anymore.
We glamorize a lot of the historical past, and it sounds sumptuous and beautiful, but their hygiene was suspect in a lot of cases. There is a myth that people didn't bathe, and that's not actually true. They might not have bathed as often as we do, and certain people had access to bathing in different ways than we would. But they weren't necessarily as dirty as we might think that they were. But they didn't have like toothbrushes. They had to get creative about that. So like people's teeth would be falling out, and they ate terribly. So like half the men that were wealthy had gout,
Yeah.
and so they had a lot of challenges in that regard, definitely.
Well, I think we've teased our audience appropriately, and they can tell that it's eclectic for sure. I don't think you left anything out. We're going to stop now and have you read so people can become tantalized by your style. And we'll be back in a minute.
So this is a passage about Bartolomeo Scappi, and he's working for the Pope at the time, for Cardinal Campeggio, which some people might know because he was the cardinal legate to the court of King Henry VIII, and he was the one that failed to stop King Henry VIII from divorcing. And this is a scene where Bartolomeo has to prepare a dinner for Cardinal Campeggio, who is hosting Emperor Charles V. And he needs some help, so he thinks he knows who to go to. Late that afternoon, Bartolomeo went to Michelangelo's studio, a stone's throw from St. Peter's in the Borgo Nuovo neighborhood. He brought with him a bottle of brandy milk, a strong liqueur made with brandy, orange, vanilla, and cream. It was a drink once created for Lorenzo the Magnificent. Bartolomeo had bribed one of the Medici cooks for the recipe when he visited Firenze. He had made it often for Michelangelo when he was at the Vaticano, and he hoped it would open the sculptor's ears to hearing his proposal. A young student met Bartolomeo at the door and waved him in. The sculptor stood on a ladder in the big room, chipping away at a piece of marble. Bartolomeo could make out the shape of a shoulder and an arm, but the rest of the body remained a massive piece of marble. "What do you want?" Michelangelo asked, not bothering to look away from his work. "It's me, Bartolomeo." He waved the bottle at Michelangelo. "I brought you something you might like." The sculptor stopped his chiseling and glared down at the cook. "I suppose you want something if you're bringing me gifts." Despite his gruff response, he rested his chisel on the piece of scaffolding next to him and climbed down the ladder. He was nearing 60, and his descent was not as fast as Bartolomeo remembered it in the past. "I'm wondering if you might accept a commission." Michelangelo took the bottle from him and twisted out the cork. He took a swig and gave a satisfied sigh. He looked at Bartolomeo. "A commission?" He began to laugh. It was a hearty, rueful sound that made Bartolomeo wonder why he had bothered to make the visit. Michelangelo clapped him on the back and waved him over to a long bench lining the side of the studio. "Tell me, what could a cuoco like you want me to sculpt?" No sense holding back, Bartolomeo thought. "Sugar." The sculptor had started to lift the bottle to his lips once more, but at this word he paused. "You want me to make sugar sculptures? Ha!" The bottle continued the path to his mouth. "I want you to make the molds. I'll pour the sugar and unset them, any design you want." The old artist snorted. "I don't work in sugar." Bartolomeo took a gamble and stood. "I'm sorry, my friend. I should not have asked. Sugar is a hard beast. I should not have assumed it was something you could do. I'll find someone else to cast the molds for the emperor's feast." He tipped his hat and began to head toward the door. "No, wait. For the emperor, you say?" Bartolomeo grinned and turned back.
Thank you. And you have something that people can get, a free book?
Yes. One of the things that I did is I created, for both of my novels actually, I created companion digital cookbooks. And I worked with food historians, I worked with chefs, I worked with cookbook authors and food bloggers, and my husband and I recreated a lot of the recipes for modern chefs. So if you go to my website, crystalking.com, you can get you can download a free copy of either cookbook, the one for Ancient Rome that goes with Feast of Sorrow, or the one for this one for Chef's Secret.
What do you do in your spare time?
I don't have a lot of spare time.
What a surprise. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Enjoyed the book tremendously. Will you bring number 3?
I definitely will. I would be delighted.
We'll look forward to you. Speak to the appointment calendar on your way out.
I will.
That's it for today. Off the Shelf Books on Tour. Very, very well done and enjoyable book. Bye now.